Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin daf Ayin Zayin. Shavua Tov to everyone. This week's learning is sponsored by the Greenstone family in honor of the birthday of their dear niece and cousin, Lana Kersner. Her Torah learning is entrenched with a love of tradition, connection to her mother and family, and her intellectual aspirations. And this week's learning is sponsored by Esther and Eliakim Katz in loving memory of Sarah Bat Tzvi Hirsch and Meir Lev ben Harab Yoshua Zelig and Esther, and for the safe homecoming of Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael. Okay, we are going to get started with the Mishna at the top of our daf. Before we start, I'll just remind everyone we have a siyum coming up. It was good to have something to celebrate, another milestone. We're going to be finishing not only Masechet Kiddushin, but also Seder Nashim. We have a special siyum kind of related to what's going on with Racheli Sprecher-Frankel, who'll be teaching about resilience in Seder Nashim. And we have community speaker, Dalia Levy will be speaking. So we're really looking forward. The siyum will be next Sunday. Okay, so again, the schedule, just to repeat for anyone who might not have heard it, on Friday, I will teach the Shabbat daf, which is the first daf of Bava Kama. We will start that on Friday because the daf, really the siyum should be on Friday, but we're pushing it off to Sunday. Sunday morning, we'll learn Bava Kama daf Gimel, the second daf, and then we will have the siyum Sunday evening, Israel time, wherever that is by you. And I think by then everyone will have changed their clocks, so our regular timing will be the usual difference in time, hopefully everywhere. I didn't check everywhere in the world, but hopefully you can just double check to make sure. Okay, we will get started now with our Mishnah. Today I will warn you, a little bit of confusing daf. It's a lot of drashot. And the way it helped me to grapple with the sugya is to think about it in the sense, and it's a topic we've discussed many times, which is what came first, the drasha or the halacha? And sometimes the answer is really they learned it from the pasuk, and that's how they got to the halacha. But oftentimes, or some of the times, it's that they knew the halacha because they had an oral tradition about it. And from there, they derived the halacha from the Torah, even though you could, I would say like this, the drashot are not the most convincing drashot in the world, but that's okay because that's part of the way the tradition works, is they're not just pulling it out of the blue and saying, oh yeah, let's darshan this word this way, that word that way. It's more that they have a tradition and they know this is the way it goes. And our big question today is going to be, when a kohen marries someone he's not allowed to marry, what happens to who gets disqualified, who gets punished, what punishment, how does it work? And we're going to learn something that might look to you like a bit of a double standard, but I'll give you the basics. Okay, we start with a kohen who marries a divorcee. Now, the kohen is the one who's commanded not to marry the divorcee. Therefore, the punishment goes to him. He gets lashes, okay? But what happens is she becomes a chalala, which now disqualifies her from many things going forward. Like, for example, she can't go back and eat truma in her father's house if she wanted to, okay? She is now a chalala forever. And the children, which might seem even more unfair, the children didn't even do anything wrong. And yet the children become chalalim. So this is a bit unfair. And in fact, I was discussing with actually Dr. Dalia Levy, who's going to be speaking at the siyum, I was discussing with her on Shabbat this issue of the fact that this whole chapter is very tough for us to fathom because we have situations where psulim, right, where children become disqualified because of actions of their parents. And that's very hard for us to fathom, right? So it struck me, we were talking about it in shul, and we were listening to the parsha all about Avraham and his children will get the promise that he got. And our whole religion is all about children and the future. And in a sense, the way I understand it, again, it might not be the most convincing answer, but the way I understand it is that we have a tradition. In our tradition, we pass everything on to our children, good and bad to a certain extent, right? And that someone who sins is actually ruining his children for the future because he's setting an example, or she's setting an example for the children that you don't have to follow the way of God. And then if you don't follow it, right, if the parents set the children on that path, then it's a problem. Now, what did we see in our sugya, which kind of, that yes, mamzerim pass on to more mamzerim, but if somehow they get back into the community, which again, isn't necessarily because they kept the laws, but it's in fact, in this case, because they married someone they shouldn't have married, but to a certain extent, at a certain point, the rabbis just let it go. So, and part of what I was thinking about is that the Torah seems very black and white, and the rabbis often try to take black and white and make it more gray. And that's what's really going on in our chapter. But, again, where can we do gray and where can't we do gray is a little bit confusing and up for debate about where we allow it, where we don't allow it, and how this works. So you won't necessarily see this today specifically, but yes, there's this unfair issue going on, which is the kohen himself doesn't become a chalal. Now, what does it mean the kohen doesn't become a chalal? What it means is, now, one of the things about a chalal is he passes it on to his children. Well, he clearly passed it on to his children. But for example, if he divorces his wife and marries somebody else, now, while he's married to this divorcee, he can't work in the temple anymore. Okay, just qualified for working in the temple. He doesn't do the birkat kohanim anymore. But if he divorces her, he actually can go back to work in the Beit HaMikdash, whereas she is disqualified forever. She's now called a chalala, which means she can't ever eat truma again, and there's certain ramifications for her, right? She obviously can't marry Kohen, but she could marry Kohen anyway in the first place. But it's a little bit of an unfair thing going on here, okay? And the question is, where do we get all this from? So the other thing before we start, again, it's going to be a bit of a long talk, but I think the introduction is important, which is the psukim in the Torah about a regular Kohen don't mention anything about the child, okay? They just say, Isha zona v'chalala lo yikachu, and pay attention to the order. A woman who, we can call a zona a prostitute maybe, but there's all different definitions what exactly causes a woman to become a zona. We're not going to get into that today. And a chalala lo yikachu. You're not allowed to marry a zona. You're not allowed to marry a chalala. V'isha grusha me'isha lo yikachu. And you also can't marry a woman who's divorced. Ki kadoshu le'elohav, because you're sanctified to God. Doesn't say anything about the children becoming chalalim. In the Kohen Gadol section, which is right after this, I'm in Vayikra chapter 21. I started quoting from verse 7. Now we're in verse 10. Now it starts off with the Kohen Gadol, okay, who becomes the Kohen Gadol, etc. Okay, we're going to skip. In Pasuk 14. Almana ugrusha v'chalala zona et ele lo yikach. So first of all, it says, we get added the widow. Then it says, and a divorcee, and a chalala, and a zona. It's the exact opposite order of the previous pasuk, right? The last time we started with zona, chalala, and then grusha, and they were separated. Here, all four are together. You might say, which the Gemara is going to ask at the end of today's talk, why did you even need to say all these for the Kohen Gadol? Once you say almanah, that obviously, if the Kohen Gadol has higher expectations, then of course, or higher standard, obviously he can't marry the people that a regular Kohen couldn't marry. So why do you even need to mention those three? And they're actually going to darshan things from the fact that each three are mentioned. And then it says, I'm skipping, V'lo yichalel zer'o ba'amaz, and you shouldn't desecrate your children within your nation. Ki ani Hashem kadesho, right? The opposite of kodesh is chol, right? You're going to turn your children, you're going to take away the sanctity of your children, which basically means your children will be chalalim. But notice, it's only by the Kohen Gadol. Also, only at the very end of today's daf, the very last line we're going to learn is, how do you learn from there to all kohanim that their children are chalalim if they marry the wrong person? Okay, we're going to discuss today all sorts of questions about chalalim. How many generations does it get passed down? You become a chalal by only psul kihuna, or let's say, right, there's mamzerim, but let's say regular lotas says outside of kohanim, maybe their children should be called chalalim. Now it's not, but the Gemara is going to suggest maybe it's not just, right? Maybe it's some other messed up, flawed, someone with good lineage, with flawed lineage, maybe their children will be chalalim also. We're going to say no, but that's going to be a question as well. So we're going to start with the Mishna, which is a bit of a confusing language. Bat chalal zachar psulam and akuna laolam. The daughter of a male chalal. So now we're talking third generation. We have a Kohen and a divorcee, let's say. They give birth to a chalal, a boy. He becomes a chalal because that's the zera is pasul. He passes it on. If he has a daughter, she can't marry a Kohen. So granddaughter of this relationship can't marry a Kohen. But Yisrael shanasah chalala, but if she's a chalala, okay, second generation, her parents are divorcee and a Kohen, bitok shera lekuna, her daughter can marry a Kohen. So we're going to see here is halal goes down through the generations. We're going to talk about this word la'olam is in the previous sentence. It continually goes by male, 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 male. Male halal has a male son, he's a halal. His son is a chalal. His son is a chalal. That means, by the way, they all can't work in the temple. But if they give birth to a daughter, the daughter can't marry a Kohen. But that's the end game by her because she doesn't give birth to chalalim anymore. So whereas mamzerim goes by male and female, right? She's a mamzeret, he's a mamzeret, continues to the children. In this case, if the girl becomes a chalala, that's the end. It ends right there. So it ends by the girl in the second generation. It ends by her if it's male, 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 female. That's it. Okay. But male, 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 male will continue to go on, and the chalalim will continue forever through the male children. Halal shenasa bat Yisrael. Now, we said a minute ago, if a regular Jew marries a chalala, then their daughter is kshera because she doesn't pass it down. But a halal shenasa bat Yisrael, the flip case, if he marries a regular Jewish woman, bito psula l'kuna. Now, that's just a repeat of the first line, and the Gemara is going to say that's exactly what we said in the first line, that basically it will go la'olam throughout all the generations. But we'll get back to that in the Gemara. The Gemara will say, why did you just repeat that? And they're one of the most convincing answer, but we will get to an answer. Now we're going to go to a different topic, although it's similar. It's about the children of someone who can't marry a kohen. So a convert, a female convert, can't marry a kohen, and this we discussed already. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, bat ger zachal kibat chalal zachal. The daughter of a male convert is just like the daughter of a male chalal. Can't marry. So not only can a convert, a female convert, not marry a kohen, but if her father's a convert, she can't marry a kohen. We're going to see a three-way machloket here. We've mentioned this before. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov Omer Yisrael shenasa giyora bitok shera lekuna v'ger shenasa ba Yisrael bitok shera lekuna. Either male convert or female convert who has a child with a born Jew, their daughter will be allowed to marry a kohen. It doesn't matter if you have a parent who's a convert. According to Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, though, what does it matter? Ger shenasa giyoret bitok psula lekuna. But if you have two converts who marry each other, their daughter will be not allowed to marry a kohen. So if two converts then have a daughter, their daughter is disqualified. He continues and he says, whether it's a ger or a freed slave, which is like a convert, afilu ad asara dorot, ajitei momi Yisrael. Now, imo doesn't mean only imo, it could be aviv. What he's saying is, if you have, let's say, a community of converts and they keep marrying each other, and all their parents are converts, sons of converts, daughters of converts throughout the generations, it will continue to be a problem. None of them will be allowed to marry kohanim until what? Well, as soon as one of them marries someone who's a born Jew, then it's already done, okay? So it's unlikely you would ever really have a situation like this, but it would even continue past 10 generations. Remember, we just had the 10 generations. They assume after 10 generations, you already forget that this person was a convert. So we said, right, even though a convert can marry a mamzeret, for example, after 10 generations, we assume nobody even knows they're a convert anymore. We don't allow it, even though technically speaking, you could. This is saying if you continue to marry within the convert community, and you're all sons and daughters of converts, then it will still be an issue. Your children cannot marry kohanim. That's Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. So one says, right, that it's just like the chalalim. Male children, right, has a daughter, can't marry a kohen. But Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov says no, only if both parents. And Rabbi Yossi Omer, he's the most lenient position. No, it's only a convert herself. If she didn't convert, but her parents converted, there's no issue. Okay? That's the through machloket. That's going to be an issue we're going to discuss another time, not today. Today we're going to deal with chalalim. So now the Gemara starts off going back to the language in the first case. Bat chalal zachar psulam and keuna leolam. So right, this is the males keep going. The daughter of any male chalal who's born to a male chalal, right? The daughter will always be disqualified for the kuna, but the men, right, will keep giving birth to chalalim, whereas the daughter, it's the engel. So my laolam. Well, why does it say laolam? Might have thought like it's the Mitzri and Edomi, a convert who's Egyptian or an Edomite. Just like there, it ends after 3 generations. Maybe you would think chalalim ends after 3 generations. What we're dealing with here, in any way, this is similar to what I said in the beginning, which is the rabbis are grappling with the fact that the Torah didn't specify. It just says you won't desecrate your zera, your children. It doesn't say for how long. It doesn't say even 10 generations like the moms there. It doesn't say until the 3rd generation, right? So that's why they had to specify le'olam, so that you knew this went on forever. And again, how did they know this? Must have been oral tradition, because these things are not written in the Torah. That's the whole problem with today's stuff, is that these things are not written in the Torah, and the rabbis probably had a tradition about how this all worked. And therefore they want to try to see, right? So this, they don't even see why they get it from the Pasuk. They just say, what did the Mishna mean when it said le'olam? Well, it wanted you to know this continues forever, since it wasn't clearly stated in the Torah. Yisrael shenasa chalala. Now we want to know, why is there this distinction? Where do we get that the Yisrael that marries a chalala, the children are not chalalim? Remember, 3rd generation, if the 2nd generation is a girl, like the child born to the kohen divorcee is a girl, she doesn't pass it on to her children, even though on the male, if it was a male, he would. So where do we get this from? Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon. We're going to have a gzera shav. Ne'amar kan lo yichalal zaro ba'amav. That's the pasuk by the kohen gadol that says, and don't desecrate your children. But it says be'amav, in your nation. V'ne'amar lahalan lo yitama ba'al ba'amav. Now, earlier in the section about the regular kohanim, it said, do not become impure to people in your nation, right? Only to certain people. But the same language is used, ba'amav. So very simply, there the commandment was, I'm a bat kohen, I can go to cemeteries, but my brothers and my father can't, they're kohanim. That commandment to not become impure is only for males. So likewise, this desecrating of the children is only for males and not females. So now they're going to have some questions about this. Well, once you say that Zera Shava means it's all males and not females, well, elameata bitosha kohen gadol tishtere. Well, if it doesn't apply to females, then it sounds like there's no such thing as a chalala born to a kohen and a divorcee, right? Kohen and a divorcee, or here they're giving the example of, they're often using the example, by the way, of the daughter of a kohen gadol and a widow, because the pasuk about lo yechalel zaro was said in the context of a kohen gadol, but they obviously mean for a kohen or a regular kohen also. So now the daughter of a kohen gadol should be permitted then. If the Gzera Shava teaches you it's all males, then it sounds like it's not an issue for females. Well, they say no. Miktiv bino zar oktiv. No. So on the one hand, we have a Gzera Shava that limits it to males and not females. This is why it's going to be a little arbitrary in the end. Then we have a word zaro, his children, which means even females, because it doesn't say bino, which if it meant only male, it would have said lo yichalel bano ba'amav, bino, his son. So the fact that it doesn't say bino and it says zaro must include women. So that means, again, what does it mean? Women are included in the second generation, but not in the third, right? Now, wait a minute. Not in the third when? They could be third generation if it's a man in the middle, right? So now they're going to say, bat bino tishtere. Well, if you're going to say it doesn't go to the third generation, right? If girls are not part of, they're only in the zaro, in the middle, right? So that means, again, kohen marries a divorcee. Any male or female they give birth to is going to be a chalal or chalala. But maybe, right, the daughter of his son should be okay. Now, the Mishna said it's not. Any chalal gives birth to a girl, it will be a problem. So, bat b'no tishtere. So how could you say that? So they say, well, that's because there's a different drasha that teaches you that a son who's a chalal disqualifies his daughter, okay? Even though a daughter doesn't. How do we get that? Because it says, don't disqualify your children. Makish zara'o lo. Mahu bito psula. Af bino bito psula. Your son is just like you. That's what we learn from zara'o. Zara'o means your zera, which, again, it's a drasha. Your zera is just like you. So if you can pass on impure, right, make your daughter a chalala, then your son can make your daughter a chalala. What's the problem, though? If zara'o already means male and female, and now we're saying zero is like the father, that just like the father can disqualify his son, the zera in the second generation can disqualify their children. So then it should apply also to daughters of daughters. So we're back to square one. So bat bito titzar. So then the daughter of the daughter should be disqualified if the zera is just like the father, to which they say, well, in King Zera Shava, maya hanile. Well, then what was the point of the Zera Shava? So what we're balancing here is, on the one hand, we have the zera, which includes male and female. Then we have the zera is just like the father that can disqualify future generations. On the other hand, we have Zera Shava that says amav ba'amav. Well, just like that only applies to males, this only applies to males. So therefore, they conclude, what applies only to males? The passing it on to future generations. So first, right, the second generation, meaning right after the couple's children will be females, will include females, but they can't pass it on to others. Okay, that was a bit confusing because kind of, could have gone either way. Chalal shenasa bat Yisrael bito psula. So now this line, we're just going to say Hatana L'Reisha. Didn't it already say this in the first line? So something doesn't make sense here. So, and that's why I repeat, line 3 is the exact same thing as line 1, to which they say, well, bat chalal zachar psula min ha'keuna lo'olam, right? That's the same exact thing. The daughter of a chalal zachar is disqualified forever. That's the same as saying a chalal that marries a bat Yisrael, his daughter will be disqualified, right? Forever, even though it didn't say forever, but it's the same thing. To which they answer, I did Tani Reisha Yisrael shenasa chalala. They just wanted to spell it out, so it was very clear. So once in the second line, they had to tell you a Yisrael that marries a chalala, the daughter is okay to marry a Kohen. They wanted to tell you, but a male that marries a regular Yisrael is the daughter can't marry a Kohen. So they were just spelling it out, really, okay, just to parallel it with line 2. Now we want to point out something that we already know, which is Matnitin de lo Rabbi Dostai ben Yehuda. You might remember this. If not, we're going to review it. This Mishnah does not agree with a different opinion that we saw. You might remember Rabbi Dostai ben Yehuda, where we're now pointing out, just like by the convert, there's a whole debate. There's also a debate about the chalal. So what we said in the Mishnah is really only, it's the majority opinion, but it's one opinion. And there's someone who disagrees. Rabbi Dostai ben Yehuda says, Detanya Rabbi Dostai ben Yehuda Omer, Kishem shebnei Yisrael mikveh tahara lechalalot, just like, which everybody agrees, that someone who marries a male who marries a chalala, their daughters are fine to marry kohanim, which that's what the Mishnah said. Well, kach b'not Yisrael mikveh tahara lechalalim. How does a chalal stop having children that are chalalim? All he has to do is marry a bat Yisrael, and immediately, right, the child will be fine. So he thinks otherwise. Okay. Now we're going to have to say, my time of the Rabbi Dostai Rabbi Yehuda. Where does he get this from? To which he says, Amal cha lo yechalel zara'o ba'amav. Now he's not going to darshan the zara'o. He's going to darshan the word be'amav. Be'amav is singular. It could be be'amemav, which would be plural. Okay, even though it's not always, there's a bit of a question about this, but we'll go with, and in the Torah, and a bunch of times it does call things amamim, which would be plural. Be'am echad hu demechal. B'shnei amamim eino mechal. The only time you're going to pass on chalalim is if both parents are chalalim. This is similar to the opinion of Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov about the Gerim, the convert. Only two converts can create a daughter who now can't marry a Kohen. But if one, right, doesn't matter which one, it's not. So he says the same thing about the chalalim. Because it says be'amav, it would have to be within the same nation, which he really means within the same family, the same type of issue. Chalal marries a chalala, then it will be passed down throughout the generations. It would have to be still every time a chalal would marry the chalala, or the chalala would marry a chalal. But if they're two different, a chalal and someone else, it gets canceled out. He doesn't think it continues out through the generations. Tanu Rabbanit. So again, I want to just point out, and back to what I said in the beginning, that you have this constant, and I think again, this goes back to the discussion I was having yesterday about the psulim passing down the generations. You see here that the rabbis were struggling with it as well. This whole daf, even though it's a bit of a confusing daf, and the drashot are a bit confusing, but I think what they're struggling with is trying to understand the logic of this. Like, how could it pass down to future generations? And according to Rabbi Dostai, really it shouldn't pass down to future generations. By one generation, okay, that's a little unfair, but we're not going to go past there unless he continues to marry someone who's a chalala, and then okay, then it will continue. But otherwise, it doesn't continue. You can't keep passing this on to children. Whereas the other opinion is, no, it does. So they're grappling with this. That's how I understand. Tanu Rabbanan lo yechalel zaro ein liable zaro. Now we get to the classic question, which I mentioned at the beginning. The pasuk only says you're zera. Where did you get that the woman becomes a chalala? And how do you know, why doesn't the kohen gadol himself become a chalal? Okay, so now or a regular kohen. So lo yechalel zaro ein liable zaro. So the pasuk only says the children. Ki atzma minayin. How do you know that the woman herself becomes a chalala? Which again means, for example, she can't go back and eat truma anymore. If she gets, he dies or something, and she's herself from a family of kohanim or things like that. There's a bunch of issues for her. Well, amarta kavachomer. By the way, also the fact that she's a chalala, if she marries a chalal, let's say, right, or her, right, according to, right, I guess according to anybody, if she marries a chalal anyway, there'll be a chalal, right? According to Rabbi Dostai, for example, there would be relevance that she's a chalala. So if he were to die and she marries a chalal, then their children would be chalalim. Okay. So now, how do you know that she's a chalala? Amarta kavachomer. Mazaro, and here they get to the big issue, which is Mazaro shalo avar avera. He didn't even do anything wrong, the child, and yet he's mitchalel. So he shavra avera. She did something wrong by sleeping with someone she wasn't allowed to. Einu din she mitchalel. So shouldn't she also become a chalala? To which they say, but according to that logic, what's the obvious question? Hu atzmo yochiach. That kavachomer could be knocked out because the kohen gadol himself, or the kohen himself, will prove it. Shavar ve'av emet chalal. He also did something wrong, but he doesn't become a chalal. So they say, no, that's not a question, because malahu shekain emet chalal b'chol makom. Tomar bihi shemet chalel b'chol makom. Remember, we had this Mishnah before that a woman who mates with someone who's forbidden to her already can't marry a kohen. Like she marries a mamzer, she can't marry a kohen anymore. She's got all sorts of things that disqualify her from marrying a kohen, whereas the kohen doesn't have that. Well, the kohen doesn't have that because he is a kohen, right? But he's forbidden to a bunch of women, but by mating, if he marries a mamzer, or go mamzeret, that doesn't mess him up forever. Like if he divorces her, again, he's back to himself. So she's got all sorts of things that disqualify her from all sorts of marriages. He doesn't have that. So because of that, you see that we're stricter with her than we are with him. Again, it's not the best proof. They're just trying to come up with differences, which would then let this kal v'chomer actually work. And if you're not convinced by this, if you want, I'll give you a different answer, which is Amar Kra lo yechalel zaro. This is actually not really addressing the difference between her and the kohen. It's addressing how you know from the pasuk that it's not just the children. Okay, and the first answer was it's a kal v'chomer. Now they're going to say we can learn it from the pasuk itself, but this doesn't address why her and not the husband. Okay, so Amar Kra lo yechalel zaro. Now the pasuk, the simple reading is just the children. So how do you get to the fact that her also? Well, we learn lo yechulal zeh shaya kasher v'nitchalel. The word lichalel, it really comes from chulin. It's the opposite of kodesh. And then it could have just said lo yachel. Why does it say lo yachalel? It must be coming to include something else, which is not someone who already was fine and now you're disqualifying her. Who was fine? This was a woman who's a divorcee, right? She never had a problem. Right? She wasn't a chalala until she marries a kohen, then she becomes a chalala. Whereas the child was born into chalalut, he never was kosher. So lo yechulal comes to include a different type of category of someone who was okay to marry a kohen and now is no longer, and that would be the woman. So now they say, Mayim nafsha chalomar, why do you have to give a second answer? Well, you could knock out the kal v'chomer by saying, we tried to say, well, the child did nothing wrong and becomes a chalal, so all the more so the woman who did something wrong, she should become a chalala. Well, they say, theoretically, you can knock out the kal v'chomer for a different reason, which is this chalal is much more harsh. Why? Because he never was allowed to marry anyone, right? He was never a good kohen from the first place. Or if she's a chalala, she was never allowed to marry a kohen from the moment she was born. She was born a chalala. That makes her more severe than the woman who actually was okay before, right? She was fine until she married the kohen, then she became a chalala. So Amar Kra lo yechalel lo yechulal zeh shaya kasher v'nitchalel, and that's why they brought that other pasuk in case you wanted to knock out the kal v'chomer for that reason. So we tried to knock out the kal v'chomer because of the man. We came up with a way to keep the kal v'chomer going anyway, but then they suggest that maybe there's a different way to knock out the kal v'chomer, and that's why they brought this verse. Now we're going to bring a braita that we're not going to really understand what it means right away. We're going to give 3 explanations. Only the third one will be the one that makes sense. All the others will get rejected. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ezo hi chalala, kol shenoda min hapsulim. What's a chalala? One born to disqualified people. So, my psulim. Now, psulim sounds very general. Now, we've been spending our whole chapter on psulim, right? People who can't marry each other. So, ilem psulim lo, maybe it means, okay, Rashi says, afilu hu Yisrael in biato v'avera she'ena shel mamzeret havayav la chalal. Maybe when it says psulim, it means any disqualified marriage that doesn't produce mamzerim. Okay, we know there's mamzerim for either chayve mitabeitin or chayve kritu, right? Forget about Rabbi Akiva who says chayve lav, but let's say not Rabbi Akiva. So let's say all the chayve lavim, all the lota says, maybe, right? The kids aren't mamzerim, but maybe they're chalalim. And then any kohen from some disqualified marriage can't marry a kohen. So they say, no, noda in, I'm sorry, I skipped entirely. So ilem apsulim lo, that it just means anyone who can't marry this person, and meaning not a kohen, anyone who can't marry whatever person, and then the child born to them is going to be disqualified from marrying a kohen, will be a chalal or chalala. But we have a proof from the pasuk because it says when somebody remarries a woman, okay, remember they get divorced, she marries someone else, and then she gets divorced from him, she wants to go back to her first husband, or he dies. She wants to go back to first husband, she's not allowed. But the sons are totally fine. They're not called chalalim if she does remarry her first husband and has children with him. How do we know this? Well, it doesn't say it explicitly in the pasuk, but it says dichtiv toava hi. This is despicable. But they darshan he, meaning she, meaning he toava. She's considered someone despicable, but ein banea toavim. In this case, it doesn't go to the children. So you can't say then any lo taseh that you're not mamzerim is going to be chalalim. So we didn't understand. So now we have to go back to understand the braita. Ezoi chalala, kol sheno damin psulim doesn't mean any pasul marriage. It's going to have to be kohanim. So I'm a review that hakikama. What it means to say is like this: Ezoi chalala, kol sheno damin psul kihuna. Okay, very simply, from any kohen problematic marriage, that child is a chalala. So now they say, but something doesn't make sense there either. It sounds like what's a chalala? Only if you're born from a relationship. But we know you could also become a chalala if you're a divorcee who marries a kohen. So noda in lo noda lo, what? Only if she's born, she's going to be a chalala. Hare almana ugulsha zona de lo noda v'kavya chalala. Right? All those women who marry kohanim or even just sleep with kohanim, they're already called chalala. So you can't just say that. So I'm a rabbi. Hachi kamar. Third explanation, which is going to be the right one. Ezo chalala muskeret. Which is the chalala mentioned? Now we're going to say mentioned where? We'll see in a minute. We mean in the Torah explicitly. Shelo haya lashat kosher clalal, that never was able to marry a kohen, not before something, right? Like this divorcee. Before she was divorced, she was allowed to marry the kohen. Kol shenoda mipsul kehuna. So the one who basically is born into chalalut is one born from a psul kehuna. So he's building on Rav Yehuda, but limiting the question now. The question is really, who's a born chalala, right? That from the moment she's born is a chalala. Now, my muskeret, why does it say hamuskeret? That's mentioned where? I already told you in the Torah, but now we're going to take it a little farther. I'm Rav Yitzchak bar Avin hachi kamar. Rav Yitzchak bar Avin explains this is what they really meant to say. Ezo hi chalala she'ikara midivrei Torah ve'ein tzrichim lefaresh midivrei sofrim kol shenoda min psulei kuna. What it's really coming to say is, which is the chalala mentioned explicitly in the Torah, that we didn't have to darshan it out. The rabbis darshaned out that the woman herself becomes. But the Torah explicitly is only talking about people born to a disqualified marriage of kohanim. So that's how in the end they explain the braita. New braita. Tano Rabbanit. Now we're going to focus on not who's a chalal. We're going to focus on the lashes that the kohen gets for sleeping with this woman. And now we're going to come up with, you might remember in Masechet Shabbat, we had a whole thing. If you do different milachot, different av melachas, or you do, right, and then, or you do different things that all connect with one av melacha, how many sets of lashes do you get? So now we're going to talk about a man who marries someone who has multiple names on her that are forbidden. Okay, so almana, eno chayav el echad. If he marries someone who's a widow 3 times, he's only liable 1 set of lashes. Grusha. Divorce, it sounds like 3 times. Eno chayav el echad. Almana, grusha v'chalala v'zona. She was a widow. Then she became divorced. Then she became a chalala because she married a kohen, let's say. Then she became a zona because she engaged in some illicit behavior with, let's say, slept with her brother. So, bisman shem kaseder, her history was in this order. First she was an almana, then she was divorced, then she was a chalala, then she was a zona, and then the kohen gadol married her. It would have to be kohen gadol because it's a widow. And now this is the order in the Torah. So if it's in the order it's written in the Torah, chayav kol echad ve'echad. Remember I told you the order is different by the regular kohen and the kohen gadol. But if he's a kohen gadol and it's done in this order, he actually gets 4 sets of lashes. We're going to talk about what exactly this means and how this works. This is just the braita. Then the Gemara is going to go in and explain all these cases in the braita. But if it's the opposite order, first she was a zona, then she became a chalal, then a divorcee, then an almana, or any sort of different order, you're only liable 1. We're going to get back to where this all comes from. So Amar, let's go back to line number 1. So what type of almana are we talking about here? We have a kohen gadol who slept with the widow of Reuven. Then almanat Shimon. Then he goes and sleeps with a different woman who was a widow. And then almanat Levi sleeps with the third. Of course, he's not chayav only 1 set of lashes for those 3 actions. Moving now to Amubet. Now, this is a category we've talked about before. I'll review what it means. These are 3 different people. And they're 3 different names. She's the almana of him, she's the almana of him, she's the almana of him. They're all different names. So they're both 3 different people, and they're 3 different names. So of course you're going to be chayav on each one. So that can't be what the Mishna is talking about. Option 2, which is also going to be rejected. What if he slept with one widow 3 times? So the same widow 3 times. Now, you'd only be chayav 1. So to which they say, it doesn't make so much sense to say that. Because what would be the case? And this connects with a machloket we saw, not a machloket, a distinction we saw in Masechet Nazir. Idelo atrube, if he wasn't warned at all that this is forbidden, then pshita deino chayav el achat. In other words, if he was warned once in the beginning and then he slept with her 3 times with 1 warning, the law is that you only get lashes if you were warned, and you have to be warned before each action. So then it would be obvious you're only chayav once, which means you wouldn't need to tell us this. So the braita wouldn't need to be talking about a case that's so obvious. Ella the atrube akol chad v'chadef. Each time before he slept with this one widow, they said, it's forbidden to do that, and he did it anyway. Well, amayino chayav el echad. He should be chayav in each one, as we see in the Mishna in Nazir. The Hadran Nazir shaya shotei yain kol hayom kulo. You might remember this. Nazir who drank wine all day long. The assumption is he was told in the beginning of the day, if you're a Nazir, you can't drink wine. And he drank wine all day long. It doesn't matter that he drank it all day long. That's considered one action. He gets lashes one. Amrulo, al tishteh, v'hu shoteh. If each time he went to drink, he's about to drink, they said, you can't drink, and he drinks anyway. And then they say, you can't drink, and he drinks anyway. Well, chayav kol echad ve'echad. So the first one would be totally obvious, that he would only be chayav once if they only weren't once. And the second one, he'd obviously be liable on each one. And that's not what it says in the braita. It says only one. So the first one wouldn't be here because it's obvious, and the second one because it's not true. So third option. What he did was he slept with a woman who was widowed 3 times before he did anything with her. So now they're going to say the following. So obviously she's just a widow. What's the difference? You wouldn't call her a widow 3 times, that he'd be liable 3 times. So it's also kind of obvious. Well, not so. You might have thought, remember we talked about gufi muchlakim and shemot muchlakim. We have a woman who has, right, she's called the Almanav Shimon, or the Almanav Ruvain, the Almanav Shimon, the Almanav Levi. She's got 3 different names, but it's not gufi muchlakim. It's just one body, one person, and one action. So therefore, you might have thought, because it has shemot muchlakim, she's called the Almanav Ruvain. She's called the Almanav Shimon. She's got 3 names to her. That's not what makes the issue. The issue is different people. So if he had relations with 3 different people who each were an almanah from a different person, yes, he'd be liable 3. But this is one person with 3 names. That only makes him liable 1 set of lashes. And that's the way they understand that first line in the braita. And it would be obviously the same thing for grusha, right? For a woman divorced 3 times. Now we get to this other line, which was a little bit strange. And we said only in that order is he going to be liable 4 sets of lashes. So what does he hold? Now, we have this concept called ein isur chalal isur, which means if she's forbidden to him because she's an almanah, okay? From the moment she got widowed from the first marriage, she's already forbidden to kohanim gadolim, right? Then she gets married to somebody else, not a kohen gadol, a permitted marriage. She becomes a divorcee. Now, generally, we would say ein isur chalal isur. She's already forbidden to the kohen gadol because she's a widow. So the fact that she's now a divorcee doesn't add another prohibition, because once you have a prohibition, you don't add another prohibition. Okay, the classic example we're going to talk about is eating a nevela on Yom Kippur. You eat non-kosher meat on Yom Kippur. It's already forbidden because it's non-kosher meat. Question is, are you liable also for Yom Kippur, which is more severe? But okay, we'll talk about that soon. So if you hold, yes, prohibition can fall on another prohibition, well then ibchanami, then it shouldn't matter the order. It doesn't matter if it's almana, grusha, chalala, zona. It could be zona and then almana, right? Then you would be adding. So it can't be that they hold isur chalal isur. V'ika savar ein isur chalal isur, but if you hold it doesn't, one prohibition doesn't go on another, then afilu kaseder as anamila. Then you shouldn't be liable 4 times for this. So how do we explain this? So Amarava, hi Tana isur chalal isur lei. This Tana, who said this in the braita, holds that isur chalal isur ein lei. Okay, there is no such thing as prohibition on prohibition. However, isur mosif ilei. Now you might remember this. That means if one adds something that wasn't in existence before. So for example, she was an almanah. Okay, we're now going to go through the list. Almanah asura lekohen gadol v'sharia lekohen idiot. When she got widowed, she's now a woman who's forbidden only to a kohen gadol. When she then goes and marries someone else and gets divorced, she now becomes forbidden also to a kohen hadiot. So she has now more people she's forbidden to than she was first. And that's why grusha is going to apply also to almanah. You follow? So let's read it inside. Almanah is forbidden to a kohen gadol, but permitted to a kohen hadiot. Havyala grusha, but when she becomes a divorcee, migodi tosif la isur legabe kohen hadiot, even though in the end, it's the kohen gadol who's having a relationship with her. But since more people became prohibited to her when she got married and divorced to somebody else, now she's asur also legabe kohen hadiot. Itosif la isur legabe kohen gadol. So even now, for the kohen gadol who she was forbidden to him from the beginning, it is going to have a place to kind of work, to go into effect. Okay, because the grusha is now forbidden to more people, it allows that prohibition to take effect even for a kohen gadol who she was already forbidden to beginning. Now, this woman who got divorced, now she can't marry a kohen, but if she was the daughter of a kohen, she could go back to eating truma. Okay, right? As long as she hasn't married a kohen. She marries Kohen, she becomes chalala, she can't. But at this point, all she is divorce. So we're talking about this woman in her history before she even gets to the Kohen Gadol. So first she was widowed. She couldn't marry Kohen Gadol. Then she became a divorcee. So we added that she now can't marry any Kohen. So that works. She could still eat truma. But havya chalala, when she marries a Kohen now, a regular Kohen, she marries a Kohen, she becomes a chalala now. Well, at this point, again, something gets added. What gets added? Not that she's forbidden to more people, but that she can't eat truma anymore. So we tosef isura legabe Kohen Gadol. So now, when this Kohen Gadol goes later and wants to marry this woman who was an almanah, then became a grushat, then became a chalala, well, all those things, each time it added something new. Well, Ella zona, my isur mosif ipa. Well, we've already forbidden everything to everybody at this point, right? She's forbidden to all the kohanim. She's right. What does isur zona add? And why would he get another set of lashes for that? Amar Rav Chana bar Rav Katina ho il v'shem zona posel b'Yisrael. This is a little less strong, but what he's saying is the words, the action of a zona. What's a zona? A zona could be kind of a forbidden relationship. It could be a married woman who sleeps with somebody. Well, that's forbidden to everybody, right? There's parts of zona that relate to everybody. So because it's something that's forbidden to everybody in the world and not just kohanim, it also is isur mosif. And that's why only in this order is he going to be liable for lashes. Now we're going to talk more about this. Isur chalal isur. Tani kamei Rav Sheshet. Somebody brought a braita in front of Rav Sheshet. We're going to have two versions of the story. Kol shehu b'yikach harei b'lo yikach. Kol she'eno b'yikach eino b'lo yikach. Well, the Kohen, it says, Kohen Gadol, he's supposed to yikach betula. He's supposed to marry a betula. And then it says, and he can't marry lo yikach, right? The almanah, gusha, zona, chalala, lo yikach. So anyone who theoretically he could have married when she was a virgin, he now can't marry if she's a widow, blah, 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 all those things. But anyone he couldn't have married in the first place, like his sister, for example, or his mother, or anyone who was forbidden to him in the first place that he couldn't marry when she was a virgin, he's not going to be liable to get lashes if he marries her when she's widowed. Okay? So now, Kohen Gadol, so this comes to exclude a Kohen Gadol, if his sister became a widow, since he was already forbidden to her, this again goes to the isur chalal isur. She was already forbidden to him as a sister, so therefore, when the widow comes in, it's not going to be effective, meaning he won't be liable another set of lashes, right? Because your sister, you're chayav karet, but you're also liable to get lashes. Okay, the punishment is lashes because there is no punishment in the beitim. Remember, we learned that already. Amar lachmani, Rabbi Shimon. So when Rav Sheshet hears this person bring the braita, he says, "Is that only Rabbi Shimon? Who's Rabbi Shimon? Da'amar ein isur chalal isur," because he says prohibitions don't, right? Can't. Once something's prohibited, you can't add another prohibition. Tanya, as we see in a braita, Rabbi Shimon Omer, ha'ochel nevela b'yom kippurim patur. He says you're not liable for Yom Kippur. Okay, if you ate on Yom Kippur, nevela, you're only chayav because of nevela, not a Yom Kippur, because Isur nevela obviously came first. Now, kosher meat was usher any day of the year. The rabbis say you be chayav Yom Kippur here. So they say no. They reject Rav Sheshet and say no. Afilu tema Rabbanan, you didn't understand Rabbanan properly. Yom Kippur is much more severe than nevela. Nevela is just a low taseh. Yom Kippur is karet involved, much more serious. But here arayot is much more serious than almana. Almana is just a low taseh. So a low taseh is not going to come and apply when there's something much more serious. But when there's something serious that's going to apply to something less serious, right? Once there's something less serious and then something more serious, this is similar to mosif but different, just level. So we're going to say the rabbis would agree though. Isur kal, isur chamor lo chayil. They're going to say, even though they think isur is chal isur, it's only in a case like Yom Kippur, where it's something more severe. This is less severe, so of course it's not chal, and that's how they say in the end it could be understood also according to Rabbanit. Now we're going to have the opposite, which is Rav Sheshet is going to first respond by saying what the conclusion of the previous sugya was, and then the Gemara is going to reject it for some other reason. Ikad Amre, some people say that he said Hamani Rabbanan. This is Rabbanan to Amre isur chalal isur. Right? This even fits with the rabbis who say Yisur Chalal Isur, because when the rabbis say Yisur Chalal Isur, they only said Hanimili Yisur Chamor Yisur Kal like Yom Kippur. But Yisur Kal like Almana, Al Yisur Chamor, that's going to apply on top of something much more strict. Your sister, of course, Lo Chayil. To Rabbi Shimon, if you say Rabbi Shimon, well, why isn't it Rabbi Shimon? Because Rabbi Shimon says Ein Yisur Chalal Isur even in Yom Kippur. Well, then he wouldn't need to say it here. It would be totally obvious. Hashi Isur Chamor Isur Kal Lo Chayil, even if Yom Kippur won't come in and add a new prohibition, even though it's so severe. Isur Kal, Isur Chamor Mebayev. Of course, you wouldn't even need to say it by an Alman Kohen Gadol. So it must not be Rabbi Shimon because it's obvious, not because it's not true, but because it's obvious. It must be the rabbis. To which they say, it's not so obvious. And maybe Rabbi Shimon is saying it because you might have thought, you might have thought Isur Kahuna is different. Isur Kahuna, like laws relating to kohanim, have special things to them. So your sister, yes, it's more severe in the current plane, but in the plane of kohanim versus the rest of the community, kohanim have all these extra special things. Maybe you would think the almanah, the kohen gadol, would apply because of the special laws of kohanim. That's why Rabbi Shimon would be coming to teach you, no, it's not, it doesn't, that's not true. Okay, now we're going to end with this two last things about, could someone born from a problematic relationship, not kohen related, become a chalala? Now we know the answer is no, but we're going to first see, not everybody knew that the answer was no. And then we're going to see why, where we get that from. Rav Papa Labai, Yisrael haba'al achoto, a regular Jew who sleeps with his sister. Zona meshavela, chalala meshavela, ola meshavela. Here they're talking about, does the woman herself become a zona or a chalala because she had an improper relationship? Does that make her a zona or a chalala? Ola meshavela. So do we say, now, of course she can't marry a kohen anyway, but is there, let's say, if we call her a zona, okay, she's a zona for sure. So now she can't marry a kohen. But do we also call her a chalala? In which case, right, a woman who, a divorcee and a kohen becomes a chalala. But does a woman who sleeps with her brother, who's nothing to do with kuna, does she become a chalala also, which would mean that he would get double sets of lashes if he sleeps with her. If she goes to sleep with the kohen, she's both a zona because she slept with her brother, and she's a chalala because she slept with her brother, and then he gets 2 sets of lashes. So we say, no, that's not true. Miamrina, so they want to suggest miamrina kavachomer mechavilavim havi chalala mechavi kritot lokoshken. If just by a kohen gadol sleeping with an almanah, which is just a lo taseh, a negative commandment, and without karet associated with it, and she becomes a chalala, wouldn't you think all the more so if she does something that's karet, she'd be called a chalala? Oh, Dilma, or maybe we say ein chalala elami sorkuna, or maybe a woman only becomes a chalala if she marries a kohen. To which Amar Le'abai answers him, ein chalala elami sorkuna bilvad. Chalala is only from a woman who marries a kohen who's not allowed to. That's it. Now we want to know where we get it from. And from here, we're going to go back to the pasuk and darshan the pasukim about the kohen gadol. So Amarava, Menahamilta da Amarabanan ein chalala elam yisorku. Now, where do we get this from? Ditanya, as it says in the braita. Now we're going to get off on a few other things here, and it's good because it's a little bit review and it's a little bit of just the perspective on this issue. Lo yamer grusha b'kohen gadol v'titi b'kavachomer mikohen egel. Theoretically, you didn't even have to mention divorcee by the kohen gadol because all you need to say was don't marry an almanah. Once you say don't marry an almanah, we know obviously he can't marry all the people that are regular kohen because what? Because he's a kohen gadol, we're going to make it more lenient for him. Obviously not, right? But anamina, and I would say hashta the kohen idiot asura the kohen gadol mebaya. What do you even need to say it for kohen gadol? If it's asur to a regular kohen, of course the kohen gadol can't marry the divorcee. So why did you repeat the divorcee, the chalala, the zona? So lama nemra. So number one, they want to say kashem shechaluka grusha mizona b'chalala b'kohen idiot kach chaluka b'kohen gadol. So now they're going to say, just like the grusha, zona, and chalala. If a regular kohen marries a grusha, zona, and chalala, right? First she was a grusha, then she became a chalala, then she became a zona. He would be liable to get lashes 3 times. Likewise, the same thing by the kohen gadol, to which they say, that's very obvious. Migra, pshita, migra gara, what? The kohen gadol is we shouldn't make a lesser law for him, to which they say, no, well, the grusha, chalala, v'zona, we got already from the regular kohen. But kashem shechaluka grusha mizona v'chalala b'kohen idiot, kach almanach chaluka migrusha v'chalala zona b'kohen gadol. You needed it for the almana. You might have thought maybe when she's an almana, you don't get lashes also for grusha, zona, and chalala. So the word grusha comes, we're going to now darshan each word. The word grusha comes to say almana and divorcee, right? Widow and divorcee, to say that the divorcee, just like the divorcee, could get multiple sets of lashes. For a regular kohen, if the kohen gadol marries an almana who's also got divorced, he's going to be liable 2 sets of lashes. And furthermore, right, you can learn from there to the zona, the chalala and the zona as well, for all the same reasons we saw before. So what's the word chalala coming to teach you, and what's the word zona coming to teach you? And this is where we're going to finish today. Chalala lama nemra. Now remember, why were we here? To say ein chalala ela misur keuna. You're only a chalala if it's a marriage with a kohen. That's why it says the word chalala here. It's extra to teach you. En chalala ela misur keuna. Only from a kohen. Zona lama nemra. Why do we need zona here? Ne'amar kan zona v'nemra lehalan zona. Just like it says it right here, it says it also by the regular kohen. Ma kan zaro chulin, af lahalan zaro chulin. They're making a gzera shava, and they're saying, and this is what we've been talking about the whole day, but never seeing it inside, which is whatever is true for the zera of this child of a zona with the kohen gadol, lo yichalel zero b'amav. It says the children will become chalalim. It never said that by the kohen idiot. But because the word zona is unnecessary here, we're going to make Gzera Shava back to the zona of the regular kohen. And from there, we finally get to answer that question. We learn that what's true for the kohen gadol and all these women, that the child will be a chalal, likewise for the regular kohen with all his wives. Okay, so we learned all sorts of things. I'm not going to summarize each section of this daf, but it was a lot of different sections really getting to chalalim, who becomes a chalal or a chalala, how many generations does it go, where do we learn it from in the psukim, what about multiple sets of lashes, in which cases are the multiple sets of lashes, and what makes a chalal? Is it all psulim or is it really just kuhuna, which we just said, where do we get it from the psukim, etc. Okay, wishing everybody a good day, and hopefully we'll have a better week. Wishing everybody a good day.